Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Sonia McGowan with Covenant Pediatric Wellness Center. We are getting ready to get started here any second. I'm going to give some people a little bit of time to join us and get settled. And then we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about mitochondrial dysfunction. So come on in, everybody, get settled, and we are going to get rolling here. All right. So today we're talking about mitochondrial dysfunction in complex kids. And I'm actually, I'm pretty passionate about this because we get, not to sound a certain way, but we do get really, really great results with kids here in our program. And I think one of the reasons, part of my secret sauce is that I spend a lot of time testing and analyzing and intervening with mitochondrial function. So a little bit of information about me. Why do you care who I am, right? Because I'm telling you about things that may help your kids. So there you see myself with my husband, Shannon. He's a CPA and he specializes in agricultural numbers. I don't know. He's a genius. I don't know all the things that he does, but I do know that he is a specialist when it comes to agricultural accounting. We have two kiddos. Well, really, I can't say that anymore. They're both grown. Libby is 20, like next week. In a couple of weeks, she turns 20. She lives in Kansas City. She is an audio engineer. She's a musician. She's a director at the School of Rock in Kansas. So she is pretty amazing. And then we have Rowan, who is 18. He is getting ready to leave for college in about a week and a half. He is going to be a theater and costume design major at a university in Illinois. And he really is the reason why my practice is the way it is today. You see that picture with his hands over his ears. This was, Rowan, his entire toddlerhood. He had a lot of really challenging behaviors, lots of sensory problems. He had a lot of eczema. He had, terrible poops. He was nonverbal till he was 4. And it was really, really hard to find the right kind of help for him. I was told all sorts of nonsense, like, Rowan is the way he is because he has an older sister. Rowan is nonverbal at age 4 because you're a helicopter mom, right? So a whole lot of nonsense. Luckily, I didn't listen to any of that. And we navigated through his issues. And by kindergarten, he was indistinguishable from his peers. And today, like I said, he's getting ready to leave for college. He's a fluent reader. He has, no academic problems. He got huge scholarships to go to university. So I consider him my first recovery story. But I'll tell you, I will not forget what it felt like taking my kid all over the place, trying to get help for him and not being able to do that. And so I remember saying to myself at 2:30 in the morning, awake with a screaming baby, if I'm ever in a position to make this different for another mom, I'm going to do that. And so that's really what drives my whole approach to my practice. So that pooch there is my sweet Lola. She went to heaven about 7 months ago. Our house is still really empty without her. And then below that, that's a picture of Mitch Lending and his dad, Ron. And so Mitch was a guy who I worked with in college. He was labeled as being profoundly mentally retarded. But through the use of, at that time was called facilitated communication, now looks more like spelling to communicate. We discovered that he actually just had a body that wasn't very cooperative, but that he was a savant. He had a genius IQ. And, he is a big reason also for why my practice is the way it is. He's in heaven now, and so is his dad, but they were, a big driving force in the way that I practice and the way that I designed Covenant to be. All right, so we are a multi-specialty clinic right in the middle of Missouri in Jefferson City. We have lots of different services. So kind of the primary thing that I'm involved in is the work with complex kids. So we do, brain-based chiropractic, we do functional nutrition, we do craniosacral therapy. We also do a lot of work with kids and adults who have oral restrictions, so lip, tongue, cheek ties. So we use craniosacral therapy, myofunctional therapy, chiropractic to address those issues. We also do a lot of work with pregnant moms and new babies. We also do, again, lots of testing. So lots of nutrition testing, labs. We have hyperbaric oxygen therapy. We have ion cleanse foot bath. And then we also have a pediatrician on staff. So Dr. Hannah Strong is a DO. She is a general pediatrician, and she is part of our practice as of January of this year. So she is a very knowledgeable pediatrician who is also very pragmatic. So a lot of the things that other pediatricians require you to do or have, that is not a requirement here at Covenant. All right, so the why matters. This is a phrase that drives me every day. There are no bad kids and there are no purposeless behaviors. We have to figure out the why behind the way a child is behaving so that we can intervene, we can address it, and when we fix the why, everything else gets better. And we really pride ourselves on the way that we make the tiny mighty. So our practice is 95% pediatric, and we work really hard to identify the why behind complex kids' behavior and just clear those roadblocks away from kids. So if it's a tongue tie, or if it's retained primitive reflexes, if it, you name it, sensory issues, we work to get to the bottom of that and clear that out of the way so that they can show how smart they are, so that they can, be meaningful members of their families, make school easier, right? So we're pretty passionate about figuring it out so that kids' lives are not hard. So let's talk about mitochondria. So think back to your last science class, right? We talked about in every science class, every biology class, you learn about cell biology. And so a lot of times we talk about the cell like a city. And within that city, we've got different, businesses or different people who do different jobs. So the mitochondria is one of those organelles inside the cell. It is considered the powerhouse of the cell because it's, one of its main jobs is to generate the energy currency of the body called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So think about ATP like gas for the car. It's also responsible for something called cellular respiration. So it's not respiration like, we breathe with our lungs, but it basically is breaking down molecules like glucose to produce energy. So within that process, we have glycolysis, we have, the breaking down of glucose, we have the Krebs cycle, and we have something called oxidative phosphorylation. I am not smart enough to teach you all of that. There are books that and Google that can, teach you all those very specific things. You don't care about that. We just want to help you understand why mitochondrial dysfunction could be at play with your child and how we figure that out and what we do about it. So, functions of the mitochondria. We talked about ATP. We talked about glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, all of that. But also another thing that the mitochondria does is something called apoptosis. So that means programmed cell death. And so you have to have certain cells die at a certain pace so that new cells can come on board and do their work. And so this is essential for tissue development, for immune system response, immune system regulation, removal of things we don't need anymore, used up molecules, any kind of toxin, all of that is a critical thing that the mitochondria does. Another thing that the mitochondria does is that it helps manage calcium. So calcium is important for a lot of cellular processes. So it's important for muscle contraction, for neurotransmitter release, for gene expression. So the way that your calcium inside your chemistry is regulated is a big part of what the mitochondria do. The mitochondria are also involved in something called reactive oxygen species. So sometimes electrons will escape the process and will create these sort of free floating oxygen molecules. And too many of these, they're called radical oxygen species. Too many of them can damage cells. And so the mitochondria are designed to be able to neutralize those reactive or radical oxygen species. And so for any of you who have worked with me before, we, during the testing process, have talked about something called oxidative stress. And so that's exactly what this is. So we're looking at, does the body have enough levels of antioxidants? What does the oxidative stress look like? There's a real important correlation between oxidative stress and complex situations like autism. So we always want to keep our eye on that. And then fatty acid metabolism. So the mitochondria break down fatty acids, which help start the Krebs cycle. And it's really, really common for kids with autism and other complex needs to not manage their fats and fatty acids very well. It's really common for kids to have low cholesterol, to have low fatty acid levels, omega-3, 6, 7, 9. Generally, those are quite dysregulated, along with vitamin D. So we see kind of this, triad of issues around fats with kids with complex needs. So what are the symptoms of mitochondrial dysfunction? Well, the first thing that, if you were to Google this, one of the first things you're going to read is fatigue and muscle weakness. Yeah, that is a really common one. But I'll tell you, sometimes we will see the opposite in complex kids. So a lot of times we'll find kids who on labs show very severe mitochondrial dysfunction, but in real life, they do not show fatigue like you and I might. In fact, sometimes they can seem awfully busy with really stupendous stamina. So that's a fairly common presentation. So don't discount mitochondrial dysfunction just because your kid does not show fatigue, okay? It's pretty common to see low muscle tone. So kids who are pretty squishy, and again, the opposite can hold true. So sometimes we see pretty significant dysfunction on labs, but they're a super high tone type of a child. Really common to see digestive problems like constipation, malabsorption, vomiting, belly aches. And these are all things that I look very closely at when I'm doing a history and exam with a child. Because you have to think about, if you use the car as an analogy, you have to have gas in the car to make it go, right? You have to have gas in the car to turn it on so that you can run the radio and the air conditioning. So if you don't have enough ATP, enough gas in the car of the body, you can't have higher level functioning that's efficient. So you can't have, great focus and brain development. You can't develop speech, right? You can't have a good functioning immune system. You can't have good poops if you don't make enough ATP. You can't detoxify without enough ATP. We will very frequently see endocrine and metabolic challenges. So we see, endocrine means hormone. So some challenges around their hormone levels. We see often very poor focus, poor attention. Sometimes we'll see growth and development issues too. So sometimes, kids are a little bit smaller than we expect. A really common thing that I see day to day with kids is that they may be growing just fine, but their hair doesn't grow. So, moms will say, this child's 5 years old, they've never had a haircut, and yet their hair is not very long, or it may be not very long and quite thin as well. Sometimes I'll even see issues where fingernails and toenails don't grow very quickly, rarely need to be trimmed. So that when I see that in a child, I always think mitochondrial dysfunction. And then, of course, we see immune system dysregulation, because the immune system has, the mitochondria have a really big role in immune system regulation. So what causes dysfunction of the mitochondria? So we can have things like nutrient deficiencies. So it's really, really common for me to do a nutrition panel with a complex kid. And when we look at their nutrient levels, almost across the board, they're deficient on every one of them. And one of the first things that I say to every mom is, do not feel guilty. It is not that you aren't feeding your child very well. It's that, sometimes kids are selective, but it's generally more than that. Kids just aren't very good at digesting in many cases. They don't uptake their nutrients very well. And it creates this vicious cycle of problems. Another thing that will cause dysfunction is pathogens. So any sort of bacteria, any kind of virus, parasites will interfere with the way the Krebs cycle can function. Toxins are another big deal. And what you'll end up kind of putting together is vicious cycle over and over again, right? Because you, for example, have deficiencies which cause mitochondrial dysfunction, but if you don't have good mitochondrial function, you can't digest your food very well. So it's this, round and round we go of difficulties. With toxins, what will happen is, we have a high toxic burden in our world right now for most everybody, but kids with complex needs tend to have a very full toxin bucket, and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and eventually that bucket is full and overflowing. So things like chemicals or metals or mold are, pesticides, herbicides, all of that are definitely burdensome to a child. And again, with this vicious cycle, it takes a lot of cellular energy to detoxify. So toxins get in the way of making cellular energy, and you need a lot of cellular energy to get rid of those toxins. So, you really kind of get hung up in that process. Inflammation will definitely interfere with the function of the mitochondria, as will those reactive oxygen species that we talked about, and genetic SNPs. So SNP stands for single nucleotide polymorphism. It's kind of a fancy way to say a mutation. So most of us have probably heard of the genetic SNP called MTHFR. It's kind of a buzzword, the last couple of years. There are many, many more than just MTHFR, but there are lots of them that are specific to mitochondrial function. And so it can be a really helpful test to rule out exactly what genetic SNPs might be at play. So let's talk about the cell danger response. Have any of you heard of the cell danger response? If you have, put it in the comments for me so that I can see how many of you have heard of that. And by the way, if you do have questions, just drop them in the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to answer those. So of course, we know the mitochondria provide energy production. They also have a major role in cell defense. So when the cell is under threat, the mitochondria change from being a powerhouse of energy production to being more like a battleship, ready to fight off whatever the threat is. So the threat might be a bacterial infection. The threat might be mold exposure, right? It could be a virus. It could be, any number of things that are a challenge to the system. And so when the mitochondria go from cranking out energy to now being a defender, what happens is less ATP is made, right? Because the mitochondria is mighty, it's very smart, but it's also, mitochondria are not good multitaskers. So we can't be a producer and a defender at the same time. It's one or the other. So I'm either making lots of ATP or I'm defending the place. And so when it's time to defend against a bacteria or a virus, etc., then less ATP is made. When that happens, we have less energy, right? And that can look like fatigue. The problem is when the body gets stuck being a battleship instead of being a producer, this is the gateway to chronic and complex issues because you can't heal when you're in a defense mechanism. Michelle, you have heard of cell danger response. It's really fascinating. Dr. Robert Navio is really the guy who has sort of uncovered this and made it public. And it's quite fascinating. It's very, very pertinent to kids with complex needs. All right, so mitochondrial dysfunction can have far-reaching effects in the body. It can affect every organ system, right? Because the more active an organ is, the more mitochondria it has. And so, yes, it affects every organ system, and it affects the vagus nerve. And so most kids who have complex needs, autism or whatever it might be, tend to not transition very well from a fight or flight nervous system response to a rest and digest nervous system response. And so when you have mitochondrial dysfunction, it's really common for the vagus nerve to not be as optimal as it can be, not as efficient. And kids tend to get stuck in that fight or flight response. So when you think about our kids, they generally have poor digestion. They generally have weird poops. They generally stay stuck in fight or flight. The mitochondria just can't keep up. So again, we have this vicious cycle, right? And so it's really important that we test and figure out exactly what's going on and at what point the mitochondria are struggling so that we can kind of stop this whole cycle. Excuse me. All right, so how do we test for mitochondrial dysfunction? First and foremost, we have to start with a history and physical exam. Any doctor who doesn't do that with you isn't worth their salt. So, so much information that is valuable comes from taking a really good history. And lots of clues about a person's health comes from that physical exam. So I tend to do kind of this set of labs that I'm pretty happy with. I generally love the metabolomics the most. It's a test from Genova Laboratories. Excuse me, I've said too many words today. It is a urine test with the ability to add a blood spot add-on, where we just prick the finger to get a little bit of more information. I will also use the organic acids test. You've also heard it called an OAT. So the metabolomics really is an OAT with some extra information. So that's why I love it so much, because you really do get a lot for your money. We're also going to talk about the mitoswab and some genetic tests as well. Okay, so let's dive into the metabolomics. And actually, the webinar that I'm doing in September is specifically about the metabolomics. So in case you're interested in learning more about this test and how it might help your child, that's what I'll be talking about next month. So this is the cover sheet of the metabolomics. And so it really looks at these 5 different pillars. And one of those pillars is the need for mitochondrial support. And so you can see this child has a lot of oxidative stress. They have very impaired mitochondrial function. We also look at methylation support. I'm not really sure I can read the other two. The print is pretty small, but you can definitely download the notes on that. Let's see, toxic exposure and omega imbalance. Sorry about that. I read this test every day, but I don't have it memorized. So this is the front summary of this test. And I pulled out some issues specific to the mitochondria. So this is the page that shows deficiencies. So we've got antioxidants, B vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, and of course the little black diamond is exactly where the patient stands. Green is good, yellow and red are not. So you can see this is a child who really struggles with their nutrient levels. So immediately when I see this, I think, well, how can they not have mitochondrial dysfunction, right? Because you need all of these different nutrients to make those chemical pathways go. This test also gives us a glimpse at intestinal health. So it tells us about malabsorption, it tells us about bacterial and yeast overgrowth. So urine cannot tell us anything more specific than this, really. It would take a stool test for us to know exactly what bacteria we're dealing with, to tell us exactly what yeast we're dealing with and how much. But it's a nice sort of yes or no to give me the data I need to know, do we need to go a little bit deeper in terms of looking at digestion? All right, so this is the actual section that tells us about cellular energy and mitochondrial markers. So this is telling us how well does this child turn fats into energy? Not very well. How well do they turn carbs into energy? Again, a definite struggle. And then this is the Krebs cycle itself. So you can see that the Krebs cycle is quite inefficient for this child. And this is actually a little guy who, of course, had pretty significant mitochondrial dysfunction, but also had seizures of unknown origin. And when we intervened and took care of these findings, his seizures have stopped. So this is telling us about, it tells us about oxalates. That probably needs to be its own webinar, but you can Google oxalates. It's a big deal for kids with autism and other complex needs. But this is what I really wanted you to see, is that oxidative stress. Remember, we talked about those reactive oxygen species and how they can damage cells. And so this child definitely has high levels of lipid peroxides. So that shows me that his body is undergoing a lot of oxidative stress. Now, remember I said that the organic acids test, or the OAT, was very similar to the metabolomics, and it is. So it gives us a lot of the same analytes, just sort of presented in a different way. But it does tell us about, things like fatty acid oxidation. It'll give us some more brief information about deficiencies and gut health as well. So again, here's just another look at what that organic acids test, that this is a part of one page. The organic acids test used to be available through a lab called Great Plains Labs. They have since changed to Mosaic Diagnostics. So that's why I have both of those names there. Another test that I really, really love is from Religion Labs. It's called the Mitoswab. I really like it for lots of reasons, but one of the main reasons is because it's a cheek swab. So it's really easy for little kids to be able to give a sample. So what this test basically does is it will break down the different respiratory complexes of that electron transport chain. And so it will tell us, first of all, citrate synthase will tell us, are there enough mitochondria to make adequate amounts of energy? And then it will break down respiratory complex 1, 2, 3, and 4. I generally do the Mitoswab Plus because it gives all 4 of those particular complexes. So this allows a practitioner to be very, very specific about how they intervene specific to mitochondrial function. And, sometimes if you've got a hiccup at respiratory complex 4, we do these things, as opposed to if there is a problem with respiratory complex 1, we might do something different. And so this test is very affordable, and it is, again, very easy to get the sample. And the information we have lets us be very, very specific on how we intervene. So remember how I said, there's a list of things that will negatively impact mitochondrial function. We have to know what those things are. So we need to know, are there environmental chemicals, things like glyphosate, heavy metals, different pathogens like bacteria, viruses, parasites? Are there other toxins like mold? It's important for us to know if these things are part of this mix, because if they are and we don't know it, it's going to be harder to make progress with mitochondrial function. So there are lots of tests that we can do from various different labs. Most of them really, in the grand scheme of things, aren't terribly expensive. And so we here, of course, do all of these tests. We have relationships with all the different labs. And so we can walk you through exactly what would be appropriate for your child based on their presentation. So once we know that we've got mitochondrial dysfunction at play, what do we do about it? So of course we have to do some testing. My motto is I like to test, not guess. I don't want to just guess about anything. I want to know what our targets are, exactly what we're trying to achieve, so that we can then kind of look at before and after intervention outcomes. So we have to, in my opinion, support mitochondrial function first. That is, in almost every case, that is exactly what I will work on first. So that might be things like supplements. It might be diet change. It may also be other things like the Ion Cleanse foot bath, because that is going to impact mitochondrial function, as well as hyperbaric oxygen. Hyperbaric oxygen is well known to be an anti-pathogen, but it's also very well documented as being an intervention that will improve mitochondrial function and the number of mitochondria in the body. We have to address pathogens. So if we know that maybe a child has strep, for example, we really have to work on that. Or if they have high mercury, high aluminum, if they have high glyphosate, high pesticides, these are all things we've got to address and clear out of the system so that they will stop getting in the way of that Krebs cycle. We need to reduce toxic burden. So these kids are just sponges for toxins. And so you need to, clean up the diet, be organic where you're able. Switch away from plastic in the kitchen. Don't put your hot leftovers in a Rubbermaid container. Switch to glass. Don't ever microwave anything in plastic or styrofoam, right? That's just, it's terribly toxic for kids. And also thinking about going more green in terms of your household products. What do you do laundry with? What do you mop the floors with? What do you wash your dishes with, right? All of those things can be very toxic if you're not, super intentional about the kinds of products that you use. And you really need to get help from a qualified practitioner. So this is not, it's just so complicated. And you need the benefit of a doc who's on your side, who has lots of experience and lots of good outcomes with kids. And so always look at mitochondria function first. That's my motto. And like I said before, I really think that's a lot of how we get such really good outcomes with kids, is because we look at that first. So again, don't forget the why matters. We have to figure out why a kid is behaving the way they are. There are no purposeless behaviors and there are no bad kids. We have to dig in and figure out what is driving the behavior and then address that. So if you have questions, again, I'll stay on for a few minutes. If you want to drop any of your questions in the Q&A box, definitely do that. If you're interested in more information, this is my contact info. Again, we're in Jefferson City, Missouri. I do offer telehealth visits. We can do testing remotely. This is my email address, phone number. These are our socials. So you can definitely get in touch with us with any concerns or questions that you might have about your child. So does anybody have questions before I let you get on with your lunch hour? Michelle, let me put my peepers on here. Do you take out-of-state kids that would not be able to come to you? Yes. Happy to do that. We see kids from all over, definitely. So we can generally work out anything distance-wise. Christy says, hi, thank you for this. Can you describe mood issues that are related to mitochondrial dysfunction? So generally what I see is kids will kind of just be sort of high maintenance, right? So high needs generally can be kind of irritable. The other thing that we'll see too is mood will be labile. So it's up and down. They're fine until they're not fine. They're happy and they're sad, to the extreme within just a few minutes. And my theory is, I think it's related to mitochondrial function, but deeper than that is blood glucose or blood sugar dysregulation is also a really common co-occurring set of symptoms with mitochondrial dysfunction. And so, yeah, really, really common to see things like serotonin and dopamine to be very dysregulated in kids who also have mitochondrial dysfunction. And so because of that, then their moods are all over the place. Generally sleep will be too. And so it's kind of amazing when we fix those deficiencies and we address mitochondrial function, we will very often see that kids' behavior and mood become a lot more stable. Kate, hi Kate. We had great results improving mitochondria function and working with me. Oh, yay. My child became more happy after. Yeah, we've made a lot of progress with your kiddo. And mito is a big deal for him, as are toxins, right? So we have that sort of vicious cycle happening where lots of toxins because you don't have good ATP production, round and round. So yeah. Other questions? I'm actually gonna put in the chat, if anybody's interested in scheduling with me, my scheduling coordinator is named Brittany, and her email address is brittany@covenantwellness.net. You'll see it there in the chat. You can just email her directly and she will work with you to get you scheduled. Michelle says, do you have suggestions for a chiropractor in other states? So I have lots of feelers out, especially on Facebook. I'm part of lots of groups of fellow chiropractors. And so it's really common for us to just post on the group saying, hey, I need a chiropractor in this zip code. Is there anybody here who's willing to take a new patient? So that is a good, something that I do pretty regularly for people who are my patients. So yeah, there are good ones of us all over. There aren't very many docs who practice the way I do in terms of the functional nutrition, but you can definitely find really, really competent and skilled chiropractors to do brain-based chiropractic adjustments for you. All right, other questions? Well, I'm so happy that all of you guys joined me today. There will be a replay link sent to you so you can access this anytime. It's unlimited. So if you wanted to go back and listen to it again, you sure can. I generally do a webinar on the first Friday of each month. This month is a little different. I have too much going on tomorrow, so I just pushed it up a day. But generally first Friday, I do webinars. And like I mentioned, next month I'll be doing a deep dive into the metabolomics and the organic acids test so that you can, it's just important for parents to know, what's important, what's a priority to spend your money on, which tests are going to give you the best return on your investment. And, one of my pet peeves is families will tell me a lot that they found a functional nutrition or functional medicine practitioner close to them who ordered, all these different tests, gave them the test results and nothing else because they didn't, they weren't familiar enough with the test to be able to analyze it and turn it into a plan that could actually be implemented at home with mom and dad. And that infuriates me because if you're going to order a test, you need to understand it and you need to understand how to turn that into a plan. And sadly, it doesn't happen very often that we find practitioners who really, really know how to do a deep dive into these test results. So I really want families to understand, these are your test options. These are the ones that I think would maybe be most helpful for your family. And to know that you need to expect a treatment plan from those results, not just here are your results, have a nice day. So, all right. If you are interested in scheduling with us, you absolutely can. You can call the number that you see on the screen, or you can email Brittany@covenantwellness.net and she'll get you going. So we do have just a short waiting list, a couple weeks generally, maybe 3 to get in. to see me. Office visits, telehealth are both available. So thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it so much. And I hope you guys have a great Thursday and a lovely weekend coming up. Take care.